Muscle vanishing after 50? Do this before you lose your freedom. I want to start with a statistic that stopped me the first time I encountered it in the clinical literature. After the age of 50, the average American loses between 1 and 2% of their muscle mass every single year. That sounds modest. It does not feel modest when you do the math. By 65, if nothing is done to counteract it, that loss compounds into somewhere between 15 and 30% of the muscle you had at your physical peak. By 80, some studies suggest the number approaches 50% in sedentary individuals. And here's what makes this more than an aesthetic concern. Muscle is not just the tissue that moves your body, it is the largest metabolic organ you have. It is the primary site of glucose disposal, meaning it is your body's most important regulator of blood sugar. It produces signaling molecules called myokines that travel through your bloodstream and protect your brain, your heart, and your bones. It is the tissue that determines whether a fall at 72 breaks your hip or whether you catch yourself. It is, in a very direct sense, the organ of independence. The loss of muscle mass with age has a clinical name, sarcopenia. And the research now describes it not as an inevitable feature of aging, but as a condition, one with identifiable causes, measurable progression, and proven interventions. But here's the part that may surprise you most. The standard advice about preventing muscle loss after 50, the advice that has been repeated in doctors' offices and fitness magazines for decades, is incomplete in ways that matter enormously. The protein recommendations are too low. The exercise recommendations miss the most critical variables. And several of the most powerful interventions are ones most people have never heard discussed in a medical context. Today I am going to give you the complete, science-based picture. We will dive into all of that in today's episode. I am Dr. Alexander Wellrich. In 30 years of clinical practice, I have watched sarcopenia quietly dismantle the independence and quality of life of patients who had no idea it was happening until it was already significantly advanced. Because sarcopenia does not announce itself, it does not hurt. It just gradually changes what you are capable of, until one day you notice that the stairs feel harder than they used to, that your grip is weaker, that recovering from physical effort takes longer than it once did. By that point, the process has been underway for years. What I want to do today is give you the science you need to get ahead of it, or, if it has already begun, to meaningfully reverse it. Because the research is unambiguous. Muscle loss after 50 is not fixed. It responds to intervention. It responds dramatically to the right intervention. And the window to act is right now, regardless of where you are starting from. If this kind of direct, evidence-based conversation is valuable to you, please subscribe to this channel. And now, let us talk about the most underappreciated organ in your body and what the science actually says about protecting it. To understand how to stop something, you need to understand why it is happening. So let me walk you through the primary biological mechanisms driving sarcopenia after 50, because there are several, and they all need to be addressed. The first is the decline in anabolic hormones. Testosterone, growth hormone, and IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, are the primary hormones that signal your muscles to grow and repair. All three decline significantly with age. Testosterone in men drops roughly 1 to 2% per year after 30, accelerating after 50. In women, the hormonal shifts of perimenopause and menopause produce a particularly sharp change in the anabolic environment. Growth hormone secretion decreases by approximately 14% per decade after young adulthood. These are not small changes. They fundamentally alter the biological environment in which your muscles are trying to maintain themselves. The second mechanism is what researchers call anabolic resistance. This is one of the most important concepts in muscle aging research, and it is one almost nobody outside of sports medicine and gerontology knows about. In young adults, a meal containing protein reliably triggers what is called muscle protein synthesis, the process of building new muscle tissue. After 50, this response becomes blunted. Your muscles become less sensitive to the anabolic signal from dietary protein. You need more protein to produce the same muscle-building response that a smaller amount produced at 30. A study published in the Journal of Nutrition found that older adults required nearly twice the protein dose per meal to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis compared to younger adults. The third is the loss of motor neurons. Your muscles are controlled by nerve cells called motor neurons, and you lose them with age, particularly the fast-twitch motor neurons that govern explosive, powerful movement. When a motor neuron dies, the muscle fibers it controlled can be re-innervated by slow-twitch neurons, but that re-innervation is incomplete, and the result is a shift towards slower, weaker muscle fiber composition and a reduction in total fiber number. This is why power, the ability to move quickly and forcefully, declines even faster than raw strength with age, and why falls become increasingly dangerous. The fourth mechanism is chronic low-grade inflammation, the inflammaging we discussed in our previous episode. Inflammatory cytokines, particularly interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, directly suppress muscle protein synthesis and promote muscle protein breakdown. This is why people with chronically elevated inflammatory markers lose muscle faster. The two processes are biochemically linked. And the fifth is inadequate nutrition, specifically inadequate protein and specific micronutrients. Which brings me to what may be the most actionable part of this episode. Let me address protein directly because the current mainstream recommendations are insufficient for adults over 50, and the scientific evidence on this is clear and consistent. The recommended dietary allowance for protein, the RDA, is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. For a 175-pound adult, that works out to about 64 grams of protein per day. This is the number you will find on most government nutrition websites. It is the number many primary care physicians still quote to patients. Here is the problem with that number. It was calculated as the minimum required to prevent deficiency in a general population. It was not calculated as the optimal intake for preserving muscle mass in older adults. And the research on muscle aging is unambiguous that those are two very different targets. A comprehensive review published in the Journal of the American Medical Directors Association examined the evidence across multiple studies and concluded that the optimal protein intake for older adults seeking to preserve muscle mass is between 1.2 and 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, roughly double the RDA. For that same 175-pound person, we are talking about 95 to 127 grams of protein per day. Not 64. But here's the nuance that most protein discussions miss completely. It is not just how much protein you eat. It is how you distribute it across your meals, and what kind of protein you prioritize. Because of anabolic resistance, the blunted muscle protein synthesis response we discussed earlier, older adults benefit specifically from consuming a higher protein dose per meal rather than spreading the same total intake across many small servings. Research from the University of Texas published in the Journal of Physiology found that a single meal containing 40 grams of protein stimulated significantly greater muscle protein synthesis in older adults than a meal containing 20 grams, whereas in younger adults the difference was minimal. The aging muscle needs a larger stimulus to respond. The type of protein also matters. Leucine, an amino acid found in high concentrations in animal proteins, particularly whey, eggs, and red meat, is the primary trigger for the molecular pathway that initiates muscle protein synthesis. A study published in Nutrition and Metabolism found that leucine content of a meal was the most reliable predictor of its anabolic effect in older adults. Plant proteins are often lower in leucine and sometimes less digestible, which means that vegetarians and vegans over 50 need to be particularly intentional about protein quantity and food combining to ensure adequate leucine intake. Practical high leucine protein sources. Eggs, particularly whole eggs, not just whites, contain the ideal amino acid profile for muscle synthesis. Beef, chicken, and fish. Greek yogurt and cottage cheese. Whey protein if you use supplements. And for plant-based eaters, edamame, tofu, tempeh, and hemp seeds are among the better leucine sources in the plant kingdom. A few years ago, I worked with a patient I will call Carol. She was 68, a retired nurse from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Intelligent, health-conscious, and deeply frustrated. She had been going to a gym 3 times a week for 2 years and felt like her body was not changing at all. Her strength had not improved. Her muscle tone had not improved. She was eating what she described as a high-protein diet. When we looked at the details, the picture clarified immediately. Carol was eating approximately 55 grams of protein per day, just under the RDA for her weight, and less than half of what the research supports for muscle preservation at her age. She was distributing it in small amounts across 5 or 6 meals, and her exercise routine, while consistent, consisted almost entirely of light cardio with minimal resistance training. We restructured her protein intake to 110 grams per day, concentrated into 3 meals, each containing at least 35 grams of high-quality protein. We shifted her exercise program to prioritize resistance training with progressive overload, meaning she was consistently challenged to lift slightly more than she had the previous week. Within 16 weeks, Carol had measurable increases in muscle mass on DEXA scan, the gold standard for body composition measurement, for the first time in years. She told me she felt stronger getting out of a chair, stronger on stairs, and stronger in her own sense of physical confidence. The biology had not changed. What changed was giving the biology what it actually needed. But here is where it gets even more interesting. Because protein and exercise are the foundation, but there is a layer of targeted nutritional science on top of that foundation that most people, and most doctors, have never discussed. Let me give you the exercise picture with the precision it deserves, because the research on this is specific, and the specifics matter. The most important thing I can tell you about exercise for muscle preservation after 50 is this. Resistance training is non-negotiable, not optional, not something you add if you enjoy it. It is the most evidence-based, consistently supported intervention for sarcopenia in the entire scientific literature. A comprehensive meta-analysis published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine analyzed 49 randomized controlled trials and found that progressive resistance training produced significant increases in muscle mass, muscle strength, and functional performance in adults over 60, and that the benefits were present regardless of baseline fitness level, age, or sex. You are not too old. You are not too deconditioned. The response is there, waiting to be triggered. The word progressive in progressive resistance training is the key variable that most people miss. Your muscles adapt to a given load. Once they have adapted, that load no longer provides sufficient stimulus for continued growth. You must consistently, not dramatically, but consistently increase the challenge. A heavier weight, one more repetition, one more set. This principle, called progressive overload, is the engine of muscle adaptation at any age. Without it, exercise maintains what you have but does not rebuild what you have lost. For adults over 50, the research supports training each major muscle group 2 to 3 times per week, with at least one rest day between sessions. Compound movements, exercises that work multiple muscle groups simultaneously, produce the greatest hormonal and metabolic response. Squats, deadlifts, rows, presses, and lunges are more effective per unit of time than isolated single-joint exercises. If joint health is a concern, these movements can be modified significantly. Goblet squats instead of barbell squats, seated rows instead of standing rows, while preserving most of the benefit. Timing of protein relative to exercise also matters. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that consuming protein within 2 hours after resistance training significantly enhanced muscle protein synthesis compared to consuming the same protein at a different time of day. The post-exercise window represents a period of heightened anabolic sensitivity. Your muscles are primed to use the amino acids you give them. A meal or protein-rich snack within that window is not optional nutrition. It is part of the training. Aerobic exercise belongs in the picture too, but in its proper role. It supports cardiovascular health, helps regulate inflammation, and contributes to insulin sensitivity. But it does not build or preserve muscle the way resistance training does. For muscle preservation specifically, aerobic exercise is the complement, not the foundation. And one more point on exercise that the research supports strongly: speed of movement. Training with attention to moving the concentric phase, the lifting phase, as quickly as you comfortably can, even with a moderately heavy weight, preferentially recruits the fast-twitch muscle fibers that are most at risk of being lost with age. A study published in Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise found that explosive intent resistance training produced greater gains in power and functional capacity in older adults than slow, deliberate lifting at the same weight. Power training, lifting with speed and intention, is particularly important after 50. Beyond protein, there are several specific nutrients that research has identified as important for muscle health after 50, and most people are not getting enough of any of them. The first is vitamin D. Vitamin D receptors are present in muscle tissue, and vitamin D plays a direct role in muscle protein synthesis and muscle fiber function. A meta-analysis published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that vitamin D supplementation significantly improved muscle strength and reduced fall risk in vitamin D-deficient older adults. Deficiency is extraordinarily common. The CDC estimates that more than 40% of American adults are deficient or insufficient. If you have not had your vitamin D level checked recently, that conversation with your doctor is worth having. The second is creatine. I know that word has associations with young bodybuilders, and I want to ask you to set those associations aside for a moment, because the evidence for creatine in older adults is genuinely impressive. Creatine is not a steroid, not a hormone, and not exotic. It is a naturally occurring compound found in meat and fish that your body also synthesizes. A systematic review published in Nutrients analyzing 22 randomized controlled trials found that creatine supplementation combined with resistance training produced significantly greater gains in muscle mass and strength in adults over 50 than resistance training alone. The typical studied dose is 3 to 5 grams per day, a small, well-tolerated amount that is among the most extensively researched supplements in sports medicine. The third is omega-3 fatty acids, specifically the EPA and DHA from fatty fish or fish oil. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that omega-3 supplementation enhanced muscle protein synthesis in older adults, partly by improving the anabolic sensitivity of muscle tissue to protein and insulin. In other words, omega-3s help address the anabolic resistance problem we discussed earlier. 3 to 4 grams of combined EPA and DHA per day has been the dose used in relevant human studies. The fourth is magnesium. Magnesium plays a role in over 300 enzymatic reactions, including many involved in energy production and muscle contraction. Studies have linked magnesium deficiency, which is common in older American adults, with reduced grip strength, slower walking speed, and accelerated muscle decline. Foods rich in magnesium include dark leafy greens, pumpkin seeds, almonds, black beans, and dark chocolate. I want to end the content section with something that I believe reframes this entire topic in the way it deserves to be framed. When I talk to patients about preserving muscle after 50, The conversation often starts in an aesthetic place. They want to look better, feel less soft, fit into clothes better, and I understand that. But I want to give you the deeper picture because the stakes are significantly higher than appearance. Hip fracture is one of the most devastating health events that can occur in an older adult. Approximately 300,000 Americans suffer a hip fracture every year. Of those, studies published in the Journal of Bone and Mineral Research show that up to 25% die within 12 months, not from the fracture itself, but from the complications of immobility, hospital-acquired infection, and the physiological cascade that follows. Of the survivors, fewer than half regain their prior level of function. The primary risk factor for a fall that causes that fracture is not bone density. It is muscle weakness and impaired neuromuscular control. Strong muscles catch you when you trip. They absorb impact. They maintain your balance in the split second that determines whether a stumble becomes a fall. Sarcopenia does not just make you weaker, it increases your fracture risk, your fall risk, your surgical risk, your recovery time from any illness, and your likelihood of requiring assisted living earlier than necessary. A study published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that muscle strength in midlife was one of the strongest independent predictors of functional independence at age 75 and beyond. Not cholesterol, not blood pressure, though both matter. Muscle strength. The investment you make in your muscle tissue between 50 and 65 is a direct investment in what your life looks like at 75 and 85. I think that reframing matters. This is not vanity. This is the biological foundation of your future independence. Here is your action plan grounded in the research. 1. Calculate your protein target and hit it every day. Take your weight in pounds, divide by 2.2 to get kilograms, and multiply by 1.4. That gives you a reasonable daily protein target in grams for muscle preservation. For a 160-pound person, that is approximately 102 grams. Distribute it across 3 meals with at least 35 grams per meal. 2. Begin a resistance training program this week. If you are new to it, start with body weight movements, squats, lunges, push-ups from a wall or counter, rows with a resistance band. If you are experienced, add progressive overload. If you have joint issues or health conditions, consult a physical therapist or certified trainer who works with older adults before beginning. The investment is worth it. 3. Eat a protein-rich meal or snack within 2 hours of every resistance training session. 35 to 40 grams of protein, 2 eggs plus Greek yogurt, a chicken breast, a whey protein shake, consumed in that post-exercise window. 4. Have your vitamin D level checked at your next appointment. Ask for a 25-hydroxyvitamin D blood test. If you are deficient, below 30 nanograms per milliliter, discuss supplementation with your doctor. Most adults over 50 benefit from 1,000 to 2,000 IU daily, though optimal dosing is individual. 5. Consider creatine monohydrate at 3 to 5 grams per day in conversation with your physician. The safety profile is excellent, the evidence is solid, and the synergy with resistance training in older adults is one of the most consistently supported findings in this field. 6. Add omega-3s through fatty fish twice a week and consider a fish oil supplement providing 2 to 3 grams of combined EPA and DHA daily. This addresses both anabolic resistance and the chronic inflammation that drives muscle breakdown. Let me bring it all together. Sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass, is one of the most consequential biological processes happening in your body after 50. It is quiet, it is gradual, and it touches everything: your energy, your metabolism, your brain health through myokine signaling, your inflammatory status, and ultimately, your physical independence. The standard advice, eat a little protein, do some walking, stay active, is not enough. The science is clear on what actually works. Protein at twice the RDA, distributed strategically across meals, with a focus on leucine-rich sources. Progressive resistance training 2 to 3 times per week with attention to power and compound movements. Targeted nutritional support including vitamin D, creatine, omega-3s, and magnesium. And the understanding that every year this is addressed is a year of compound interest in your physical future. You are not too old. The biology responds at 60, at 70, at 80. The research shows it. My patients show it. Carol showed it. The window is open. If today's episode gave you something you can use, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave me a comment. Tell me where you are starting from. Are you already training? Just beginning? I read every comment and I respond to as many as I can. In our next episode, we are going to talk about something that connects everything we have covered in this series. Sleep. Not sleep hygiene tips you have already heard, but the deep science of what sleep actually does to your body at the cellular level after 50. What it repairs, what it clears, what happens to your brain and your metabolic health when you consistently do not get enough of it, and what the research says about genuinely improving it. It may be the most important episode yet. Until then, take care of yourself from the inside out.